What happens when 18-year-old Baron Trump decides to challenge everyone who is waiting? At a gala in Beverly Hills, his answer to a cynical question from a journalist shocks everyone. Privilege or the prison of a name? The Baron reveals his personal truth, and it changes everything. Why did his words blow up social networks, and why is this not just a political speech, a symbol of a new generation? Don't miss it. Watch to the end to find out how one answer can change the whole game. The crackling lights of cameras and the whistling of glasses are how the gala evening at the famous Waldorf Hotel begins. Astoria in Beverly Hills. It's not just a night out, it's the event of the year. The most powerful people in America are here, and their every move is marked by objectivity. Hollywood, moguls, political leaders, everyone who has learned to be part of this elite, are here. But amid the glitter and luxury, one figure catches every eye. Baron Trump. Tall, reserved, smoking, which obviously suits him perfectly. Not just an heir, but a figure no one can take their eyes off of. "Have you seen him?" whispers a woman dressed in an expensive dress with diamonds that sparkle brighter than all the lights in the room. "Is that Donald Trump's son?" She glances at the Baron, who, despite the attention of those around him, stands by the window and looks thoughtfully at the city lights. He seems different, not what they expected. There is something, too, calm in his gait, in his manner. "I don't believe he's going to be his father," the man replies, holding back a grin. The Baron doesn't seem like the type to read aloud. He's too detached. The other guests listen, and some even begin to discuss what he will do in the future. Will he inherit the empire? Or will he fade into the shadows? There is too much pressure to become the next Donald. Voices are heard. This discussion is like gunpowder in the air. No one knows if it will happen, but everyone thinks that some kind of explosion is coming soon. Everyone is looking at the Baron, and everyone, from politicians to actors, asks the same question. How will he decide his fate? But the Baron doesn't notice anything. He stands in the center of this world and doesn't try to participate in it at all. He seems to exist outside of all this gossip, outside of politics and wealth. His gaze penetrates every part of this event, but he doesn't focus on anyone, as if he is looking for answers to questions that cannot be answered in the luxurious halls. "Look at him," one man whispers quietly, turning to his neighbor. "Do you think he even understands how to be a part of this?" "I don't know," the other replies, "but if he was anything like his father, we wouldn't have found him here. He's too distant, like he doesn't care about any of this." With each passing moment, the Baron becomes the center of discussion. People in the room begin to feel a strange tension as they watch him. Maybe they expect this guy to soon be the one they'll be discussing on the news. Maybe they just don't understand what's going on in his head. But one way or another, the Baron was in no hurry to appear. His calm, his detachment, like a magnet that attracts attention. And perhaps at this moment he will have to make a choice that will change his life. But how and what will he say? And why does his silence seem so powerful that it does not allow the immune system to move on? No one knows what will happen next. And while everyone waits, the Baron continues to stand there. And for everyone present, this may be the most intense moment of their lives. The talk of Baron Trump was gaining momentum. In a room where silver tables reflected the light, exquisite dishes swirled with opportunity, the topic that excited everyone was one. What's next for this guy? A crowd followed his every move, and in the eyes of this crowd there was both interest and bewilderment. "Did you see him standing by the window?" asked a tall woman in a black dress with a silver necklace, holding her emotions and a glass of champagne. "Do you think it's just a fashion for mystery, or something more? He looks like his father, but I can't figure out who he wants to be seen as. Too serious for a guy his age. He doesn't even try to conquer all the living with glamorous parties." Her companion, a man in an expensive suit, leaned back and rested his elbows on the table. "Well, maybe he's aiming for something more. But all this talk of politics, it's not accidental. Everyone says he'll have to continue the old man's work. But I think the Baron is too smart for that. Too reserved. Yeah, that's for sure. I always thought he would be some kind of family drama hero, but now I'm not so sure," she replied with a sneer. "Do you think he's ready for all the drama on camera and all the criticism? Or will he just say, 'No, I don't want to'?" The atmosphere was tense. People couldn't tear themselves away from the Baron, a figure too out of the ordinary to simply disappear into the crowd. This was the moment when they began to realize that he might be more than just Trump's son. Some started talking about politics, some about fashion, but all the conversations came down to one question. What will the Baron do with all this? He once said that he doesn't like being compared to his father. "You see," the woman said quietly, raising an eyebrow. "He said that in an interview. Maybe he just wants to be himself, not who people want to see him with." Nonsense, the man replied confidently, shaking his head. He can't just be himself. He's already said too much about names. We all know how that works. With that name, he can't be anyone else. His gaze was almost appraising, but hardly any of them could have imagined how the evening would turn out. The Baron remained steady in the shadows, his silence only adding to the sense of uncertainty in the air. All thoughts about his future seemed to merge into one hypothesis. He will either follow in his father's footsteps, or he will try to escape this pressure. But could he really become what everyone expected? Or was Baron Trump something new, something that was not written into the template? The Baron continued to stand, seemingly outside this endless bustle. He was not part of all these conversations, he was not part of their world. But everyone knew. He was here, and his story was just beginning. With every glance and every word whispered behind his back, the question became more and more painful. Will he be able to escape the pressure, or will this pressure shape his destiny? The crowd watched him with anticipation. They all knew Baron Trump was more than just a guy with a family. That was a question that had yet to be answered. And as they discussed his future, the Baron remained silent. That silence, the complete mystery, seemed the most tense moment in the room. What happens next? Michael Rourke was not one to waste an opportunity. When he spotted Baron Trump in the restroom, standing with a drink and talking to several influential people, his heart skipped a beat. He couldn't take the moment away. Egotistical, sarcastic, and always looking for a thrill, Rourke knew that tonight was the chance he'd been waiting for. Baron Trump, with his taciturnity and reserve, was the perfect target for his wit. He walked up to the group where the Baron stood and noticed how everyone around him began to slow down when Rourke appeared. Apparently, they already knew better than to mess with this journalist. But the Baron didn't look away. He stood there, as if by himself, as if he didn't notice all those eyes. And that probably only made Rourke even angrier. "So this is what you are, Baron Trump," he began with a grin. "You know, I've always wondered what it's like to have your life completely defined by your family. Have you ever wondered what it would be like if you weren't Donald's son? Maybe you would have become something like that." His words sounded like a blow to his ego. The Baron didn't answer. He didn't move. It was obvious he was used to stationary attacks, but Rourke was still trying to throw him off balance. He knew the Baron didn't like public discussions of his personality. This was the moment that could explode the evening, and Rourke was sure he could draw out the Baron's emotions. Growing up in that position, with that level of privilege, you can't even imagine what it's like to be a normal person. To live without these cameras and the expectations of everyone around you. Rourke continued, enjoying the effect his words were having on the atmosphere. Everyone around him fell silent, waiting for the Baron's state. But the Baron remains calm. And suddenly his voice pierced the silence like lightning. He looked at Rourke and said, "You are right. I have privileges, but they do not make my life easier. Waiting is not always a gift." The room froze. Everyone nearby felt the tension in the air from his words. Even Rourke, accustomed to being the ultimate critic, was taken aback. He had not expected this answer. The Baron's words were not just frank, they were frank, honest. And in that moment, Baron Trump, perhaps for the first time in his life, showed his true side. Wait. So you're going to tell me that it's hard for you just because you're judged by your last names?" Rourke asked, trying to get back to his sharp tone, but the Baron's words had really made him think. The Baron took his time answering. "Yes, it is difficult. I will always be Trump's son, but I am also a human being, and this is not just doing interviews on the red carpet. You don't understand what it means because you don't live under that pressure." It wasn't just a matter of words. It was a real clash of two worlds. And although Rourke tried to maintain his aggressive approach, something in the way the Baron spoke made him shut up. The Baron, with his calm and truth, put Rourke in a very uncomfortable position. The crowd watching the Baron began to think. Applause, slow but sure, began to spread through the room. People began to realize that the Baron was not just his father's son. He was a person who was not simply following in footsteps, but trying to figure out what it means to be a person in a world full of expectations. In a world where every step of measurement is done through the prism of names and reasons. Rourke, not knowing what else to say, stepped back. The Baron looked into his eyes, and something in his gaze made everyone in the room realize that this young man was a much stricter person than they had ever imagined. What happens to Baron Trump when his strength is not in fighting, but in keeping quiet and being himself? Baron Trump stood in the center of the room and felt as if the whole world had stopped. The silence was so thick that you could hear the air rustling. All eyes were on him, and Michael Rourke finally felt like his loud words had been stabbed deep into his body in the evenings. But the Baron, who usually avoided attention, did not move. He was not angry, not agitated, not blushing. His face was calm as always, but his eyes were so confident that they immediately drew the eye. "Do you think I'm just a kid who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, Michael?" Baron said so calmly that his voice was almost icy. "Are you sure you understand what it's like to be me?" He said it with such calm that Rourke felt for a moment that he was taking the initiative. But the journalist did not give in. He leaned forward, ready to answer, but Baron did not give him the chance. "You're right. I was born into privilege, with a family that means more to me than most. And you want me to apologize for that? Or are you going to see me suffer because everyone judges me by that last name?" The Baron paused, his eyes never leaving Rourke, as if he were looking at a problem that needed to be solved, not just a person. "Maybe you just can't understand that all that privilege comes from the other side. It's not a gift, it's a chain." The room froze. The silence grew even more dangerous. From politicians to actors, from tycoons to businessmen, everyone watched as young Trump not only responded to insults, but turned the tables. No one expected the guy everyone thought was simply Trump's son to be so smart, so poised, so profound. "Do you think I enjoy this attention?" the Baron continued, his voice a little quieter, but every word he spoke felt like a blow. "Do you have any idea what it's like to be under the gaze of the world every day? Do you think it's easy? No. I'd love to just be a regular guy. But having such a symbol propping me up like an icon all the time is a weight that can't be lifted. Have you ever thought you'd be somebody if everything you did and said was constantly on trial?" Rourke, used to being on top in such conditions, was now unsure. He tried to find words, but they stuck in his throat. He didn't know what to say. Something in the Baron's voice, in his confidence and calm, broke his usual defenses. Was this guy, whom everyone thought weak and servile, really stronger than any of them? Finally, Baron concluded his answer, which, in essence, was not just a reaction, but a statement. "I don't want to be a politician. I don't want to be a figure that can be used for someone's purposes. I just want to be myself. But society doesn't allow it. Because they don't support me as a person. Change can only be made as the son of Donald Trump." Baron raised his glass and took a leisurely sip, allowing this gesture to conclude his speech. A moment of silence, then applause. They were met with great applause, but it quickly became stormy. The Baron, who stood in the center of this luxurious hall, in front of everyone, not only defended his honor, but also showed everyone that he was not just a shadow of his father. He became a voice that made everyone think. People started exchanging glances, whispering, discussing among themselves. At that moment, when the Baron remained silent and could not appear at the provocation, he turned to his strongest side. He did not throw a rage, did not shout at everyone, did not try to settle down. He simply told the truth. The truth, as always, turned out to be the most powerful force. The Baron had returned to the shadows, and although he was no longer visible, his words still hung in the air like lightning. He was not just the president's son. He was an individual, ready to fight a world that did not suit him. The room, filled with glittering gold and silk curtains, was suddenly silent. People who had been discussing outfits, taking selfies, and laughing moments before now sat motionless, their expressions full of surprise and bewilderment. Baron Trump's answer continued to echo in their heads, like the solution to an ancient riddle. It wasn't just an answer. It was a candor that blew up the standard perception of everything they knew about him. The Baron, composed and calm, returned to his place by the window. He did not even try to look at the people's reactions. His words had done their job. And now, when they began to realize what he had said, a storm began. "I can't get over the fact that he said that out loud," the woman in the office whispered. She was still in shock. "He's Donald Trump. How can he say something like that?" The woman raised her hand to her mouth, but she couldn't hide her shock. That wasn't part of normal political speech. The Baron had just said that his last name wasn't just a privilege. It was a burden. And when he said that he was considered less than human, less than a symbol, she realized that this guy might actually be out of this world. Her interlocutor, a clear-eyed man who usually liked to pick apart people, just shook his head. "Did you hear him? He said it was hard, living under pressure. And I know I believe him. This isn't just politics. This is a reality none of us can understand. We can't imagine what it's like to be in his shoes. Yes, he's right. But why is he so calm? Why didn't he give up? Why didn't he burn out like the others?" the woman said, surprised. This guy is definitely not what everyone thought. He's not an ordinary teenager. He's a human being, and he has his own truth. The topic the Baron touched on was starting to gather momentum. Wherever people gathered, in every corner of the room, they were discussing what had just happened. Understand, this was the moment when everyone turned to him, and not because he was just the look of Trump's son. The Baron was the man who turned his weakness into a strength. He wasn't trying to be what everyone wanted to see. He was just being himself. Suddenly, someone standing on the sidelines rushed to share their opinions. He just revealed the truth. Look, no one understands the pressure he feels. Every step he takes, every word he says is an assessment, a criticism. We all see him through the filter of our addiction and insurance. But he is not afraid to speak the truth. And that is why his words are so scary. Because they concern everyone. At that moment, the Baron became the center of the conversation again. But this time it wasn't just another conversation. It was a realization. You think he's like everyone else? That he lives in a bubble? But he's one of us, only with a much bigger burden on his shoulders, someone said. As the Baron's words began to sink in, a sense of change hung in the air. He had not given in to pressure. He had not tried to play by the rules the world had made. And perhaps that was his strength. His silent but powerful truth. He was the one who had commanded that even in such a situation one could remain human. And, as often happens, the video of his speech immediately went viral. While I, who was in the audience, could not forget his words, the world, sitting at home, also began to realize that there was something more to those words. Not just a moment of courage. This was a game changer. Baron Trump became more than just a character in a family saga. He became the voice of a generation that is not afraid to show that behind the latest glitz and glamour lies a reality that is far more complex and painful. Baron's words spread across the internet. People began to rethink his role, his place in the world. The moment became a symbol of something bigger. And if anyone thought Baron was just Trump, his own son, now they understood. This guy is his own boss. When the video of Baron Trump's speech began to spread online, no one could have predicted how quickly it would go viral. In an instant, the 18-year-old heir became the #1 topic on every platform. This wasn't just a comeback, it was a challenge to society. The Baron wasn't just responding to an attack. He was opening everyone's eyes to what it means to be watched by the world, and what it means to have a name that means more than any of us could ever imagine. Did you see this? This video is just breaking the internet, the girl exclaimed, scrolling through her phone. She couldn't believe how quickly she began sharing footage of Baron. His words weren't just conversation starters. They were mind-blowing. He's not just Trump's son. He's the voice of everyone who's ever felt misunderstood, she added, and it resonated with everyone who saw the video. He told the truth, he said, sitting across from her. He told everyone straight to their faces that privilege is not just a gift, but a terrible burden. You have no idea what it's like to be under scrutiny every day, to have your last name define who you are, even if you don't want it to. At that moment, it became clear that Baron Trump had become not just a trend, but a real sensation. Within hours, his words had conquered all news channels and social networks. Videos of his response spread across platforms at incredible speed. The discussion did not stop for a minute. Hashtags with his name began to trend on Twitter, and even the most hardened critics were representatives of national unity that he had done something amazing. I can't believe he said that. One user wrote in the comments section of the video. Trump is Trump, but the Baron? He just destroyed that whole image. He said he doesn't want to be who everyone wants him to be, and that all this privilege doesn't make him happy. People started sharing the video, but it wasn't just a speech, it was a manifesto. On the next morning news show, the anchor said, Baron Trump has simply become the voice of a new generation, realizing that privilege doesn't always equal happiness. At the gala last night, he unfurled his promises with the expectations and disappointments of all those who live in the shadow of celebrity. The camera cut to a still of the Baron standing quietly, his words continuing to echo over the airwaves. However, the public reaction was far from unambiguous. Some users on the internet praised Baron for his honesty and courage. This guy is not just his father's son, he is his own man, others wrote. He opened my eyes to how difficult it is to be a person when the world only sees you as a symbol, they said in their blogs. But there were those of me who tried to minimize the significance of his words. What did he really say? That all his problems were just French traditions? He was paying too much attention to himself, the critics wrote. They could not understand how such simple words had become the trigger for all this turbulent state of affairs. However, there was one undeniable observation. Baron Trump had become a viral sensation. He was not just a teenager who grew up in luxury. He was someone who could break the mold and make the world hear his own words. Each new publication about the Baron provoked cautious discussion. People who previously did not care who Baron Trump was now began to wonder what he would say next, and how else he would deal with the threat and expectations. His response was not simply a reaction to an attacked journalist. It was a bold statement about how a world full of expectations and judgments is not as simple as it is being promoted from afar. The Baron was no longer just another Trump. He had become a symbol of how difficult it is to be yourself in a world that constantly wants you to be someone else. His words continued to unleash new interpretations and interpretations. And while Baron probably never expected such turbulent behavior, he became the one who changed the perception of not only himself, but the entire Trump family. As the video of Baron Trump's speech continued to gain traction, society found itself in the midst of unprecedented division. Every glimpse of his words evoked emotions that ranged from admiration to indignation. The Baron wasn't just the talk of the day. He became the symbol of a new political reality that challenged all established norms. "Have you heard what they're saying on the news?" John asked, sitting with friends at a cafe, scrolling through his smartphone. "Some people think he's just a teenager trying to get attention. And some people think he's saying something real, something we all need to hear. How is it that his words are more important than his father's actions?" His friend, sitting opposite, could not turn down his volume. "I think he just found a way to use his powers. I don't believe he is sincere. He will not change his policy. He will not take power into his own hands. It's just funny how everyone is discussing this," he replied, clearly insistently convincing himself of the correctness of his words. But John waved his admirable aside. "You don't understand what's going on. This isn't just Trump, son. This is the guy who told the world that he's weighed down by his last name, that his life isn't as perfect as everyone thinks. He's become a voice for those who can't escape the weight of societal expectations. That's important." Meanwhile, the reaction on social media was so intense that it seemed the world had split into two camps. In one exercise, there were us, admiring the Baron's courage, his determination to tell the truth despite the danger of taking away everything he knew. In another place, standing next to me, someone was trying to diminish his words, claiming that the whole thing was just a publicity stunt or another attempt to get attention. "I agree with John," one Twitter user wrote. "The Baron has shown that despite all his privileges, he is just like the rest of us. He really is. It's not easy to live life with your whole life planned out and your last name determining your destiny. Why not support him?" But the backlash was quick to come. "I don't think Baron Trump even understands what it means to be a regular person," another user countered. "In his condition, with his level of security and connections, he can't talk about the problems of regular people. All this talk is just a way to distract from the fact that he's doing nothing good." The social media storm continued to rage. People argued in the comments, drawing conclusions about who the Baron was, what he had actually said, and what it meant for his future. Some called him an inspiration, that the Capitol was setting stereotypes about the rich and famous, while others claimed he was simply self-promoting, seizing the moment. However, everyone agreed on one thing. Baron Trump had attracted attention in a way that was impossible. His words about the pain of being in the shadow of his name got people thinking. But were they creating change, or was it just a fashion statement for one night? Did the Baron really know what he was talking about? And if so, what's next for him? Despite my disunity, one thing remains clear. Baron Trump was more than just an heir. He became a focal point for public debate, and his words were something that made everyone look up, think, and argue. There were no clear attacks in the noise, but one thing was, everyone was thinking about him now as never before. At a time when his words continued to stir passions, the Baron became more than just a participant in a political drama. He became the voice of someone who was not afraid to be himself, despite the family that had already determined his fate. And now, with the whole world discussing him, no one could say for sure what would happen to him next. Time passed, but the discussions did not subside. Baron Trump, with his unexpectedly strong response to provocation, remained the center of attention. Those who had previously laughed at him or simply forgotten about his existence could no longer tear themselves away from the discussions. The Baron had become more than just part of the external landscape. He had become a symbol that embodied not only privilege, but also its hidden weight. He was more than just the son of a celebrity. He was a man who had decided to be himself in a world that was against him. "I still can't believe he said that out loud," said James, one of those watching the whole thing unfold. He was sitting with colleagues at a bar, his eyes glued to the screen where his speech was playing. "This guy, he made us think about not only what he does, but how we all view those who are born into privilege." His colleague Sarah leaned back in her chair and smiled at her face. "Yeah, you're right. You know what's interesting? We all thought he was just another heir like so many others. But now he's become some level that we could expect. Who would have thought that Baron Trump would be the one to challenge the entire society?" But the conversation wasn't just about the Baron, his speech, his remarks. It was about what all this meant for society as a whole. Everyone realized that his words weren't just a reminder of the personal problems of the rich and famous. They were a metaphor for anyone who felt trapped by their circumstances, their name, their reputation. Baron Trump became the embodiment of the shadows that haunt anyone who spends too long under the public microscope. "You see," James said, "I think he was the one who brought to light the real problem. The problem is how we judge people by their last names, by where they come from, rather than by who they really are." Sarah turned around, but she couldn't keep the words out of her voice. "But you know this could all be over really quickly, right? All this talk and excitement could quickly fade. People like to discuss new things, but then they fall back into old habits. We could forget about the Baron again in a few months, unless he does something even bolder. But that's his power," James replied, smiling. "He makes us think. He didn't just follow expectations. He created a space for others to start thinking about their lives and their world with this society, always having you in the frame. And I think that, despite everything, that will remain." When the Baron appeared on the screens again, the discussions picked up speed. It was clear that his words were no longer simply about his family and its consequences. They were about the entire world. He was no longer just an heir. He had become a leader who could make everyone look at their own lives and ask themselves, "How do I perceive the world? How do others perceive me?" And the question did not raise any eyebrows. The Baron stood in front of the stove, no longer the boy who had once found himself in the public eye. He had become someone who had shown the world that he was a force to be reckoned with. No matter what happened next, he had left a mark that would not be erased. Baron Trump had not simply answered a challenge. He had thrown down a challenge to society that could no longer be ignored. Baron Trump changed everything. His decisive response to provocation not only blew up social media, but also forced the whole world to think, what does it mean to live under accusations and demands to meet expectations? He is no longer just Trump's son. He has become the voice of those who have long been silent. So what now? Will he become the next leader of a generation or just another page in history? Don't miss how the Baron continues to fight this world full of stereotypes and pressure. Subscribe to the channel, like and press the bell to not publish this exciting story.